Hey there everybody, thanks for joining me for another one-man review. Today I've got 4 books from, I'm going to totally butcher this because it's French, Editions MATIÈRE. Again, apologies, someone correct me on that. But these are 4 books from Editions MATIÈRE that I purchased from the Wig Shop web shop site, which is a bookshop that has just like really rare comics, indie stuff, and foreign stuff like this. These are all French books. 3 of them are silent, or mostly silent, so that didn't matter. That's why when I saw the previews of them, I grabbed them. The 4th one here, which I'll review first, is Zboing by Paul Descamps. This one has a lot of dialogue in it, and the previews I saw didn't look like it has as much dialogue. So this one, there was a bit of a barrier to entry for. But the like you can see here on the inside front cover, this nice print with all of these colors on it is really, really lovely. And again, the colors on here is lovely. This one, I think I got a sense of what the story is. I'll just flip through like kind of big chunks of it real quickly. It's definitely like you know, concert poster art from like the late 60s, early 70s, inspired, I think, kind of like Peter Max type of stuff, Yellow Submarine. So it's very much about rock and roll and the power of music to transform, I believe. Again, I can't read it, but it looks like you've got some kids that are going to school and they're going to form a band, and there's jocks and artists or something like that, as best I can tell from the art. And you've kind of got this like just cool monotone all the way throughout the opening of the book. But I don't know exactly what's going on with the characters. At some point, though, they start playing music, and then this is where the book gets just really visually compelling, as you start to get these pops of color. When I was reading the book initially, given the kind of special print jobs on the covers and stuff, I was wondering why this wasn't a risograph, and then this kind of showed me why, is because there's a color explosion that has to be on a 4-color printing process here. So as the music comes in, then you start getting just all of these really beautiful, wild visuals. And within this, you start to get a lot of formal play. And here, I think the words mean a lot less. It just kind of goes into music. And then you get these fluctuations back and forth between these sections that are highly colorful and highly musical, and sections that are in this just monotone with sparse bits of color. And then you get, it seems like maybe a battle of the bands happening or something like that. So it's a really gorgeous book. Some cool optical illusions and things in there. It's just, I wish this had come like some of the other things do, with like a little translation pamphlet or something maybe, because this one, I do feel like not being able to read French was a barrier to it. And I thought it was more just going to be like the visual book that, you know, the kind of the examples that I'm showing you. So it's hard to give a, you know, a final statement on what I think about the book, but it's really fun to look at. It's really beautiful, and if this ever got translated in English, I think I would definitely like swap out and buy that edition and then donate this one or something. So that's this book. It's hard to say much about it just because of the translation. But the other 3 books are all silent. So these books, to different extents, these artists to different extents, lead into what I call the poetics of form. More or less, and I'll describe some of that more as I go. But the poetics of form is just that the content and the form become the same thing, that the shapes are the content, the compositions are the content, and the way that shape and thing move through the books becomes the content. And then with these, like with the color covers especially, you get just where the color interactions and the interactions with the print, and that becomes part of the content as well. It would be really, really cool to see this company do a full color book, because once you get inside, they're black and white, but they're still very compelling. So this is Jérôme Dubois' CITÉRUINE. I don't know, I'm gonna butcher all of these, I promise I'll butcher. Really nice transition here where you can have the color, and so this red goes through and then it just goes to the black and white there. I'll give like 1 story worth from each of these, because I think that suffices to get a sense of what the books are about. So this one here, and I'm going to go through, because all these artists, I find them to be extremely related, but very much doing separate things, even though visually they're quite similar in a lot of ways. So Jérôme Dubois here is really interested in composition and shape and form, but tends to attach it to actual locations. So there's not so much a sense of story here as just pure visual play, seeking out an area and then going through it and finding all of the kind of interesting compositions in it. So the way I'm looking at this is either someone touring a space, or like what Scott McCloud would call aspect to aspect transitions, where basically this could all be seen as happening all at once, and you're kind of just getting all of these different like removed from time angles on this one still abandoned place. But I really like these compositions like this that are static, but they've been redrawn, and so they get a sense of movement in them anyways. Like they're the exact same image basically, but since they're hand drawn, all these little dots, you know, the artist is trying to be as accurate as possible, but there's variations between them, you know, like this line's not quite at the same angle. So even though there's a sense of stillness throughout it, there's a sense of movement as well. And then like even the fact that like this is obviously the same window, but when I get closer and look out another angle, I see the side of the bush, whereas here I wouldn't. I think those kinds of perspective shifts, you know, are really interesting. And then here where you get into a corner, here you're getting to where there's almost no content other than the form, you know, it's just black, white, and gray shapes. But in this book, Jérôme Dubois really still kind of builds some connection to like objects, real objects in the real world. And I think that that's an interesting use of this style. And when I go look at the other books, you'll see some of the visual similarities, the rhythms and things that break up the pages, but this one has more of a grounded sense in visible reality. Also, just with all of these artists, really like the sensitivity to like the grid. So here where this kind of rhythmic breakup here subdivides and also impacts this. But really what this is just like we've zoomed in on this piece here, I believe, but maybe it's this piece, I'm not sure. But we've zoomed in far enough that we're just looking at that, but they've laid it out to where it also has implications of rhythm across the page. That kind of stuff is really compelling to me. Like almost did it here. It would have been great if this would have been just long enough to catch up to here. But like the gutter here coming through and running across this, the door being lined up here, but then this door shifting off slightly. There's just all of those little things that are really interesting. And then this final kind of image here like adds some mystery. So this book has like, I think, more narrative content to it. It's just pretty loose what that content is. LOTO by Alexis Beauclair. This is a really interesting one. This is probably the, well, I guess this and the next one are both very formal. But in this one, it's almost like a soloist artist, the artist soloist, where soloist would come up with like variations on a theme. So here you basically have just the idea that this ball is going to roll through this obstacle course. Like that's the whole comic. And then there's just variations on that theme. And so the artist has to come up with, okay, what are these different sequences I can put this through, these kind of formal things that I'll have to deal with, these kind of aspects of art or visual that I'll have to deal with, and then I'll figure out the same visual sequence over and over, and then use that to kind of compose. And within that, there's also some kind of meta compositional things that look really interesting. So this one's, the trick here is reflection, and you have this ball that's just rolling along, and you'll see here it gets to the end, and on these it also starts to get tempting to kind of read vertically, but you really do still read all of them. And I'll show some other pages where the vertical gets even more tempting, but you read side to side, and basically you have this ball that's rolling, and here it's now rolled onto a mirrored surface. So here where it just looks like the black is in it, it looks like the black has a rounded edge, and then you realize it's just the reflection of the ball. And then you come back over here and it has the rounded edge again. So I know that's very simple, but it's just really visually sophisticated. It looks really interesting. And basically you're taking the same structure of just like the ball on the left, the ball in the middle, and the ball on the right, and you're just going through all of these sequences and then letting just the rules of what would happen determine the rest of the visuals, and letting that determine the rest of the rhythm. So here it's like rolling on a reflective surface. Here it rolls behind the reflective surface, it looks like, so it's entirely disappeared here. And then you get it rolling through, it's gone into like a box or something, and then here it rolls out of the box and you see its reflection again. And so you just get these, you couldn't really time these things are going to time as they time based on like whatever the count of how far the ball is rolling that the artist has preset. And that just gets really interesting. It creates these really interesting compositions like this one here that are very structured and totally reasonable, but they start to look kind of chaotic and just randomized. And it shows how out of a very simple set of rules, you can get some pretty complex imagery. So there's something of like Stephen Wolfram's Cellular Automata in these, which is compelling to me. And like I said, Solowitz's conceptual art, where he'll do like variations on a theme. So now you have the ball here. This is, again, I think a really interesting sequence. It rolls under. So like we start to play with Gestalt grouping here. It starts to be like, well, how do I group all these images? Up here, it's very obvious that this is the group. And then I think it's pretty obvious that this is the group here. And then obviously this is the group as it rolls through. But visually, it starts to get kind of easy to like group it this way and see these as, it's kind of all one chunk here, because these are just similar. So I'm grouping on similarity. And then the way that like comes together and breaks apart again is interesting. And then here, as you get like it rolling up, this now I think we're seeing it from the top. You see it rolling underneath something and then rolling out from underneath, but being reflected there and then being reflected in the corners. This one gets kind of tricky. It's a little hard to see exactly, but it's fun. Like, I don't know why, but it's fun for me to try and parse out what's happening. Here it rolls by another sphere, and I think that's a really cool effect there. And then this is where the compositions, again, with that kind of grouping, it's very tempting to then group on the vertical when you have these strong vertical lines. But really what's happened is the ball has fallen down, and now it's showing, and now it's seeing the mirror. It's seeing itself mirrored as it's falling down, and then it drops out the bottom. So I really, really enjoy that temptation to like move this way, because we're talking about a vertical drop. So it's whoop, whoop. You want to see it like that, but it still keeps reading this way. And that just different, that ability to kind of group things differently, for me to see this all as one composition here, or this is one composition. There's just a lot to be said for something so simple like this. And then here we get it dropping and breaking the mirror and shattering through and landing in the water. And you get that same basic sequence through all of them, where it's like, we'll look at one more so you can see how this plays out. So now we've got, this is where the movement is relative. So the movement is relative to the ball. Basically, the ball is, I think, supposed to be stationary, and the stuff is moving around it. So you have this same, all of this stuff kind of moving around the ball through this. These other balls drop down past it. This big loop goes around it. Things push against it and pull. You don't know whether it's shooting it or whether it's shot the thing off. It goes down. And then, you break up here. A lot of them have it ending where it drops in the water, but not always. So that's basically what it is like, it's just a constrained comic focused on formal principles of movement and also just like perception. So there's the movement relative, and then there's the movement absolute, where like the ball is moving and everything else is staying still. And in this one, everything else is supposed to be moving and the ball is staying still. But because it's imprinted, of course, one could be absolute and one could be, you could switch that. It just depends on what the artist cues you in to talk about. So for something so simple, I think this is really loaded with a lot of interesting psychological principles, a lot of study of physics and things like that becomes really, really, really compelling as a book. So really enjoyed LOTO by Alexis Beauclair. And then this one, Nicolas Nadé, I'm not even going to pronounce this, but just geometry variables, basically, kind of goes, I would think, the most abstract of the three. So you have this book by Jérôme Dubois, which is the least abstract. It's, recognizable stuff in it. I think that the Alexis Beauclair book is the least or the most representational. I guess there's nothing abstract about it. I guess the sense of movement is abstract, but it's basically the ball is the ball and the shapes are the shapes and things like that. So the most representational in a sense. And then this one here is the most formal in the sense of it's just forms, just play with visual forms. So it's the most non-representational in a sense. It's the most purely formal one. Also, these got mailed to me with a bunch of these like little postcards that are advertising other books, including apparently the French edition of Yokoyama Yuichi's Plaza. So if you want that in English, you can go ahead and get it from Living the Line. If you wanted it in French, then apparently Editions MIETTES would be MATIÈRE would be the place to get them from. But just love the print on these. They have real good sensitivity to color and the highest production value. So these are people that really care about books. So this book here by Nicolas Nadé, this one is one ongoing sequence. And it just really feels like an artist who just is working with form and rhythm and those kind of things, shape, interaction, movement, the consequences. Like here you have something getting chopped off, it falls down, then it puckers out and it shoots out the ball, and then the balls connect and they form this big roll, and the roll goes and like gets cut by this thing coming out here. So there's all of these. This feels the most Yokoyama Yuichi of all of them. It's kind of abstract and focused on motion and things like that. I think they all relate to Yuichi in some sense. I don't know who came first or how the influences go. So it reminds me a lot of art that I'm seeing coming out of Spain as well, with like Cita and I don't know where Baptiste. I'm assuming Baptiste Vera is from France. Maria Medem, a lot of these artists that are doing this kind of designy, very formalist. It almost reminds me of like the 1980s noodle art that you would see at roller rinks, the Memphis Design Group, especially this book. But a lot of those artists have that vibe as well, where they're focusing on the elements of production and the elements and principles of art. So this book here is less narrative. It's just a sequence of visual transformations. And it really seems like the artist is just doing it as they go along. Like, okay, we'll get to here. What's the next thing? Well, I'll have something come out. Okay, I'll have that come out, and then it turns, and then, okay, it's going to fall, and just stream of consciousness playing with form. The one thing I particularly like about this book, and it leans the most into that Memphis Design Group aesthetics, is the use of all these wild different tones throughout the book. And the tones get more sophisticated. The use of the tones get more sophisticated as it goes, I think. But all of these like little tone patterns. So you get a lot of different grays and a lot of different textures put on. I get the feeling that this is all actually done on pieces of paper. Like you can see here some of the ruling, like they had to go back and thicken the line up so it gets a little thicker there, a little dot at the end. So it feels very precise but also handmade, which is really nice. I think something like this, the temptation would be to do it all as vector graphics. By the way, this was actually one of my favorite sequences in the book here, where you get basically like these broken rocks that set up this little wiggle pattern, and then you go to this box that unfolds and floats off, and then turns into a house, and then on the side of the house you get the little wiggle noodle pattern, and then you get kind of like breeze and window and sky, so you get some kind of like sense of atmosphere and place, and then those things become more patterned again, and they're patterns. Those three things are patterns that are now on a structure, and then you kind of move through that structure and see those patterns interact with these weird things here. So the building up like a language over time, and then getting these different shapes, and the different shapes, like there's three different shapes that get these things go through relating to those patterns somehow. and then they go up onto these three different faces with a nose and a mouth here, and some of them make it through and some of them don't. There's a lot going on there in terms of story that you could pick up on, and the story is related entirely to the forms. It's what the forms are doing, and that's why I say this is poetics of form. It's just how do the forms interact, how do they rhyme with each other, how do they repeat, how do they flow in and out rhythmically throughout the book. And then that starts applying to the textures too, and like I said, I quite like the use of the textures throughout. It's pretty obvious that these were all tones that were cut and pasted on there, so there's a lot of really nice delicate work with the tones and the textures going on that's really fun to look at. As I get more and more interested in texture in my work, like this is pretty inspiring to me. I think it's tempting to instead of having all of these textures and tones that you got to buy, I think it would be tempting to buy a pack of these and just scan them all in and then have them ready to go digitally. That way they preserve the kind of feeling of the real thing, but the ability to put it in digitally without having to rebuy all of the tones is something I'm thinking about. And this book is definitely encouraging me along those lines to take on that kind of approach, because what's going on pages like this I just think are so cool. Like I see so many uses for that. And then this one was so satisfying for me, this little rhythmic sequence here. And again, you can tell it's hand done because like the circles here are all screwed up. The rest of the circles look good, but this one they tried to do it by hand, and then this one looks like there's a template going on. But just like these little hot dog forms coming out one at a time, bloop, 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 and then getting grabbed and picked up, and it kind of brings it back to the front, right? So this book cycles back in on itself, where now you've got these like hot dog forms popping up and ready to go back. So this whole thing is almost like a production line or something like that as well. I mean, obviously not. It's pretty surreal, but it has that feeling of just production line transformation happening to us all, or who knows what. It's all just pure form. And then in the back is really cool that there's a second piece called Cadence, which was done obviously entirely with 3D digital tools and topography tools, all the same principles that work here, but being applied in a much more kind of realistically rendered style because of the computer rendering, especially like this here where this just rolls out and like the stairs accommodate it and it rolls down and the lighting's changing. This definitely makes me wonder if this is really beautiful too, where it splits open and has all these forms inside of it. It makes me wonder if this artist or a lot of these artists, are they working entirely digitally and then drawing it? Are they having mapping systems? I'm curious about how they go about planning these types of work, because they're so different from anything that you normally get in comics. Like I could definitely see someone who's working with all these values and things like this and these strange shifts of perspective and things where 3D rendering could be helpful to them. But I could also see someone really getting a kick out of visualizing all this stuff without the aid of the 3D tools. That would be a lot of the interesting challenge. But in the end, no matter what, it makes for just, like this is absolutely compositionally stunning. And so for anyone wanting to get better at composition, I think it would be beneficial to start getting into works like these three, where you get into the formal aspects, purely formal aspects of composition, because then when you do have, like in this book where you actually have like some locations and some more recognizable world objects, you can see how and looking at all three of these back to back, you can see how these kind of abstract principles of motion and these abstract principles of motion and composition then show up in a book like this. And then I've been able now to see those in even more like modern superhero books and stuff, how people are leveraging these kind of compositional tricks. So I think, studying this type of work just for the pure formal visual beauty of it would help anyone, even if you're trying to be like the next biggest Spider-Man artist or something. Having these kind of compositional tools in your belt would really be useful. So these three books I can absolutely recommend. I think they're great. It doesn't matter. You could order them directly from the publisher, Editions, MATIÈRE. There's no language in them. This one here, really beautiful to look at, but I would really like to have a translated version of it because I don't quite know what was going on. So really, thank you, the Wig Shop Web Shop, for making this kind of stuff accessible, for posting on your Instagram that you have them. You know, that's how I know to go order these kind of things. So that's really appreciated. And then I will be keeping a close eye on whatever else Editions MATIÈRE does, because if they're doing more books like this, and I do think I've got a Yokoyama Yuichi book or two from them as well that haven't been translated in English. But again, with Yokoyama, it doesn't matter because there's no language in it either. So as long as they keep producing books like this that don't require translation, I'll be nabbing all of them, because these are just gorgeous. I mean, this one, you can see the color work on the print is just stunning, the production work on these. So really big into this company, big into what they're doing, and hoping that there's more stuff like this from them. I also really hope that all the stuff that I'm seeing from the Spanish artists like Maria Medem and Cita Dura, Anna Galvin, I know some of that's starting to get translated, but I would like to see a lot more of that stuff brought over here, because I think there's a whole wealth of this kind of stuff going on in Europe, and we're just not seeing as much of it as we could. And I think it's really pushing the medium forward in a really, really cool way that, like I said, could cascade to have impact even on more narrative work. So I think these are really important works and a really important company. So if you can, go grab them. I don't know what the shipping or whatever would be, how expensive they are to get it shipped from France, or if Wig Shop Web Shop still has more, or if they only had these four, or if they got multiple copies of each. I'm not sure. So really cool stuff. Try and get a hold of them, and definitely something to study for all the people who are real serious artists out there. If you enjoy what we're doing here on the channel and the types of books like this that we're exposing you to, there's a couple different ways to support us. The first one really supports what I'm doing here on the channel. That's on our Patreon, where we have two different tiers of support that you can pledge to. The first tier gets you early access to all our videos, so something like this, you can go out and grab the one remaining copy that's left. And then at the higher tier, you can get early access to all of the previews of work that Sean and I are working on, as well as the ability to participate in the ongoing webcomic Prane Day, so you can vote to help determine what happens to Prane as he relives the same day over and over. That's all on the Patreon. The money we get from that just helps us buy the books we review, so put that right back into other creators and other publishers' pockets and keep this whole thing going. If you enjoy what Living the Line is doing and you want to support Living the Line itself, then the best thing to do is to support what Sean's doing with Living the Line Publishing. So we'll go ahead and take a look at one of his projects now. Plaza by Yokoyama Yuichi. This is translated by Ryan Holmberg and is very large for a manga. So that's a really cool feature of this book, this standard manga size. And this is just a 200 some odd page representation of what Yokoyama Yuichi thinks of the Carnival parade, and he's just made this like relentlessly loud and rhythmic book that pushes all kinds of amazing boundaries of what comics and manga are, and we could not recommend this book more. Thanks for following along. Take it away, Jack.